Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we are starting a new book today. We're going to jump into a wonderful work that was a bestseller when it debuted in 1909. The book is called The Golem and the Wondrous Deeds of the Maharal of Prague. Now, if you're not familiar with who the Maharal of Prague is, he was the chief rabbi of Prague in Czechoslovakia, who lived between the year 1519 and 1909. So he lived for 90 years, and he was a renowned Kabbalist, but more than that, a great Torah scholar, one that has survived the ages and shared so much depth in a lot of respects. But this work, I'm sorry I'm running a couple minutes late. I've had some conflicting programs with my upstream, so I've been just making sure everything's running perfect before I go live, and sometimes that takes me an extra minute or two. But this book is nowhere near as large as, like, we read the Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed. That was huge. And we just finished the series by Rabbi Yaakov Feldman on the Path of the Just. Beautiful, beautiful material. I thought that this would be more refreshing in the sense that it'll awaken the mind. But no, J.R. Tolkien did not come up with the Golem. The Golem is a creature that the Maharal of Prague actually formed out of clay, and with his understanding of the laws of nature, the laws of Kabbalah, and the workings of Hashem in this world, able to make it animate. And and of course he did it to protect the Jewish people in his region at that time. But we're going to go through the whole story, and this looks like a real interesting read. And I find the more of these Kindle books that I buy, the more I get access to others that might be of interest to us. So I've been just amazed. And plus, I got called in last night on an overnight shift, so I ended up working. I've been up all night, and but I said yesterday I would start this book today. I think it's one we can knock off in 2 or 3 sittings. So let's not delay. Let's jump right in it, because I think that this starts with the beautiful background showing the pedigree of the book. Now, the book was written by Rabbi Yudl Rosenberg in 1909, but the acknowledgements, he cites the pedigree of the documents that he gets in the acknowledgements, and I glanced at it briefly just to look at the overview of the book and the size and whatnot, and it just seems like a phenomenal thing he's tried to preserve, and it became a bestseller in 1909 when it was published. So let's get into this. Acknowledgements. Thanks to Gilad Geverayahu, Professor Ira Robinson, Professor Moshe Pillay for providing pertinent articles, to Aaron Brody, Yudl Rosenberg's great-grandson, for photocopies of Rosenberg's bilingual edition of Niflo es Maharal, that's the Golem, and other books by Rosenberg, and to Rabbi Avi Kalman, Dr. Daniel Matt, and Professor Moshe Idle for help with Kabbalah terminology. My gratitude to Carla Hanauer of Yeshiva University Gottesman Library for generous assistance and copies of needed articles, and a special thanks to Professor Louis Glinhart, whose article on the Golem sparked my interest in the subject. So he's just citing in the acknowledgments the pedigree of the articles, where he's getting it from. Okay, introduction. The word golem is an ancient one, probably more than 3,000 years old. It makes its first and only appearance in the Bible in a slightly different form in Psalm 139, verse 16. Your eyes have seen my unformed limbs, or embryo, golmi. Hundreds of years later, the word as we know it, golem, is used in the Talmud where it means unshaped matter or unfinished creation. And in one case, in Ethics of the Fathers 5:9, the opposite of a wise man, a boor, a simpleton, which anticipates the much later evocative Yiddish expression lemener golem, literally a clay golem to signify a fool. But not until the Middle Ages did golem assume its current meaning, artificial man or creature of clay. In Jewish culture and the Hebrew literary tradition, the concept of a golem goes back about 16 centuries to the Talmudic sage from Babylonia named Rava, who reputedly created a man, but one who could not talk. Although this creature was not called a golem, the legend surrounding Rava's creation can be viewed as an antecedent for subsequent golem tales. In the Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin 65b, we read Rava Brag Gavra, Rava created a man. In its very construction and anagrammic quality, the three-word sentences radiates a mysticism of its own, for the letters appear in all three words. Rashi, the classic 11th century French exegete to the Bible and Talmud, comments, this creature was created with the help of Sefer Yetzirah, or the Book of Creation, a seminal Kabbalistic text of the 3rd to 6th century CE, for they learned the proper combinations of the letters of Hashem's name. The Talmud goes on to relate that after Rava created this man, he sent him to Rav Zira, who spoke to this creation, but it did not answer him. Why? Because artificially created men do not have the ability to speak. And Rava's anthropoid followed the rules. Rav Zira then told him, you have been created by one of my colleagues, return to dust. Over the centuries, from the Middle Ages to modern times, and in many lands, these famous lines in Sanhedrin, by now a kind of text, have achieved an iconic status. This passage, a centerpiece in all excursus on the golem, was analyzed and commented upon by many mystics. Leading figures in world Jewry, Kabbalist scholars and rabbis, Nachmanides among them, were magnetized by these few but potent words that were examined from the perspective of magic, religion, spirituality, theosophy, and intellect. Pretty interesting, I don't know. In Golem legends, there are various ways of bringing the clay creature to life. One is the method Rashi cited, reciting the proper combination of the letters of Hashem's name. Another is inserting Hashem's name into the golem's mouth or affixing it to his forehead. In our text, Yudl Rosenberg's The Golem and the Wondrous Deeds of the Maharal of Prague, the golem is verified by 3 rabbis marching around him 7 times while saying various names of Hashem in special Kabbalistic permutations. Yet another dramatic method of giving life is to insert into the golem the 3-letter word emet, truth in Jewish mysticism, one of the less well-known names of Hashem. And when the time comes to take away his spirit, the first letter aleph, which stands for Elohim, or God, is removed, leaving only the 2 letters that form the word met, death. Whatever the recipe, Hashem's name is a necessary ingredient. Without it, no life would be infused into the golem. Whoa. Shalom, Imam Pavuji. Welcome, Johnny. The golem has been a continuous presence in Jewish lore since the Middle Ages. The great 11th century Spanish Hebrew poet Shlomo Ibn Gabriel is said to have made a female golem out of wood to serve as a housemaid. By the 15th century, stories of the golem were spreading throughout German Jewry, and by the 17th century, golem tales had become common in the oral traditions of European Jews. The most vivid, persuasive, and influential version of the golem legend emerges from 16th century Prague and is indelibly linked with Rabbi Loew from, I've heard he lived as early as 1519 to 1609, the famous spiritual leader of the Prague Jewish community known as the Maharal, which is an acronym for Morenu Harav Lo, the legend of the Maharal and the Golem he made for his own personal use to fetch water and to chop wood, makes its debut in the first third of the 19th century. None of the Maharal's works, nor those of his contemporaries, mention the Golem legend, nor do any writings of the Maharal's disciples. Furthermore, whatever tales of the Golem circulated either orally or in writing had him doing domestic tasks and nothing more. But then in 1909 in Warsaw, a singular event occurred that changed the direction of the legend for the rest of the 20th century and prompted the efflorescence of this story in so many branches of art. It was the appearance of Nifloes Maharal, actual full title, The Wondrous Deeds of the Maharal of Prague with the Golem, by Yudl Rosenberg, which is what we're reading. A short book of stories about the Prague rabbi and the golem he created. As an Orthodox rabbi in Warsaw, in a community that viewed fiction as frivolous and utterly outside the Jewish tradition of Torah study, Rosenberg had to disguise his authorship of the book. He resorted to the classic ruse of the discovered manuscripts, a la Defoe in Robinson Crusoe and Swift in Gulliver's Travels, who also pretended their books were written by someone else, as did Alexander Dumas, who in his preface to his Three Musketeers in 1844 claims he discovered his text in the Royal Library. To an unsuspecting public, Rosenberg was able to pass off his own book as if it had been written hundreds of years earlier by the Maharal's son-in-law, Rabbi Isaac Katz. To this day, some people still believe this. Rosenberg's claim that the Maharal's son-in-law wrote the book naturally enhanced its value. Readers were more eager to buy a book about the Maharal and the Golem written by a relative than one by an unknown Warsaw rabbi. Here is pseudographic literature at its best, reflecting the same attitude of classical works like the author of the anonymous 2nd century BC Testament of the 12 Sons, who claimed that each of Jacob's sons wrote his particular testament. In his publisher's preface, Rosenberg contends he bought a copy of the manuscript that had remained undiscovered in the Great Library of Metz. Elsewhere, he calls it the Royal Library in northern France for 300 years, and will now share this story with the reading public. In reality, no such library existed, and, needless to say, no one has ever seen this 300-year-old manuscript. And I think we got this exact statement out of Rabbi Pinchas's Taylor book, A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious, where he touched on the Golem in that, and he cites this exact thing. There is no doubt that Yudl Rosenberg concocted this fiction within a fiction, just as he changed the Golem from a servant of one man, the Maharal, into a servant of the entire Jewish community. Yehuda Yudl Rosenberg was born in Russian Poland in 1859, the same year as Shlomo Aleichem. He received a traditional yeshiva education and was hailed as a young genius. After serving as rabbi in several Polish towns, he ended his European rabbinic career in Warsaw. To enhance his meager income, he wrote books on halakha, Jewish law, and midrash, translated sections of the classical Kabbalistic text, the Zohar, from Aramaic to Hebrew, and he created works of fictions, always disguising his own authorship in this genre, including an anthology of stories he edited about Elijah the prophet that included some tales of his own composition. Rosenberg emigrated to Canada in 1913. This is pre-World War I, when he was in his mid-50s, and he held rabbinic posts first in Toronto and then in Montreal. Wow, I didn't know that. Where he died in 1935 in Montreal. Honored and esteemed in North America and Europe, but still unrecognized for his vast literary output. Despite his 27 books, almost all in Hebrew, he never gained fame as a Hebrew writer. Although Rosenberg is briefly mentioned in an Encyclopedia Judaica article on Golem, he has no entity under his own name. Unique among his Orthodox peers, Yudl Rosenberg read widely in secular literature, displaying an interest in modern Hebrew writing and books on science in Hebrew. After mastering Russian, he was able to read works from other languages in Russian translation. Despite his being labeled a folk writer, Rosenberg was not a naif. He was familiar with the sorcerer's apprentice motif, which he incorporated into one of his stories, where, from the publisher at 40 kopecks, Rosenberg notes that both the Hebrew and the Yiddish versions can also be brought to a local bookseller. Aharon Zelengold, whose Warsaw address is listed in the title pages of the work as well. On a final page, the author repeats in one paragraph the offer he has made in Chapter 2 of the availability through him of another Maharal manuscript for 800 kroner. This seems to be another of the author's clever devices to support the authenticity of the Nifloes Maharal manuscript. And the steep price, 800 kroner, the equivalent of $800 vis-a-vis the 5 to 40 cent price for his books, virtually ensured that no one would inquire about this undoubtedly invented manuscript. Rosenberg's Hebrew narrative of the enduring Golem legend took the European Jewish community by storm in 1909, a fact that is often noted in writings about the author. At the same time, he created a Yiddish version, which have translated this book into Yiddish. We have translated this book into Yiddish. Rosenberg writes on the title page, to enable people of all classes to enjoy this illuminating work. The popularity of both versions prompted a pirated bilingual edition in 1913, evidently hastily and carelessly compiled, for it is full of errors, with a slight change of title. Rosenberg's name was omitted, but curiously, Reb Aaron Zelengold is listed in the title page as the bookseller of this unauthorized bilingual book, just as he was listed on the title pages of the Hebrew original and the Yiddish translation. Rosenberg's prose style is a rabbinic Hebrew into which lines from the Bible, the Talmud, and the liturgy, occasionally phrases from the Kabbalah, blend seamlessly. Rather than sounding quite recondite, these more than 150 quotations from all layers of Hebrew would be well known to any reader who had traditional Jewish education and who observed Jewish customs. For instance, to depict the salvation of the Jews from annihilation as seen in the book of Esther, the writer skillfully draws on these familiar and oft-quoted phrases and verses. Eli Yosef, an Israeli scholar who has written about Rosenberg, noted that his Hebrew and Yiddish versions are identical, but Yosef evidently only glanced at Rosenberg's Yiddish text, for a closer comparison reveals that in almost every chapter of Nifloes Maharal, lines from the original Hebrew are missing in the Yiddish. One chapter is altogether left out. Large portions of the Christian-Jewish theological debate are omitted. Nuanced Hebrew textual details disappear, and actions of the protagonist are at times altered. Also left out of the Yiddish version are several passages that contain Kabbalistic material, and the Yiddish lacks the finely textured Hebrew with its plethora of biblical quotations. Talmudic phrases and lines from liturgical texts. Nifloes Maharal was read all over Europe, going through a number of editions in 1917. A German version by Chaim Bloch appeared in Vienna. This, too, was a pirated edition. It is ironic that Rosenberg passed off his original work as written by the Maharal's son-in-law, while Bloch, the translator, adapter of Nifloes Maharal, blatantly arrogated Rosenberg's book as if it were his own creation. Bloch then visited the United States, basked in the glory of his book, elicited sympathy for the impoverished state, and tried to collect money to subsidize his other books, without ever even giving a shred of credit to the real author. What a shame. Rosenberg's story even reached as far as the Middle East via a Judeo-Persian translation and to North Africa in Judeo-Arabic. The book also achieved the status of a folktale version of which were narrated orally in different places. Rosenberg's rendition now shaped and indelibly reshaped the basic format of the Golem legend. The Golem in the Wondrous Deeds of the Maharal of Prague contains some 20 stories, many interlocking. One could almost call it a novel because it follows a group of characters. The omnipresent Maharal, his trusted assistant, always referred to as the Old Shemesh, Reb Avron Chaim, the Maharal's archenemy, the viciously anti-Semitic priest Thaddeus, the godly cardinal Jan Sylvester, the beneficial King Rudolph, and, of course, the faithful and always dependable Golem, who is given the endearing Yiddish name Yosel, an intimate diminutive of Joseph or Yosef. By having a name the first time a golem is named, thus humanizing him even more, Yosel the Golem rises up over the previous nameless golems who were merely the result of some successful magical or mystical technique. There was nothing personal or personable about them, but in Rosenberg's book, Yosel truly becomes human. After he is attacked and injured, he is bandaged and tended and rests 3 days in bed. It's almost like the Frankenstein story. Later, he signals his desire to take revenge on his attackers. Although Yosel cannot speak, he can read and write. He follows complicated instructions meticulously and successfully and initiates certain actions on his own. Because Yosel has these human qualities, another of Rosenberg's brilliant innovations, which will be followed in subsequent Golem novel stories and plays written by other writers in various languages, Yosel's behavior distances him from a purely dumb artificial humanoid. It is noteworthy, too, that unlike previous golems in legend, including the one that he served, the Maharal, Rosenberg's Yosel does not run amok. The gentle golem does not have to be destroyed because he is violent. He was created for a purpose, and that purpose has been fulfilled. For all these reasons and for his faithfulness and near humanity, we feel a real sense of loss when the time comes for the Maharal to undo the golem's vitality and return him to dust. The reader cannot help but bid a sad goodbye to the good golem. To the major and ever-alluring theme of the golem making, Rosenberg added the Jewish element of salvation and protection. He has Rabbi Lo, the Maharal, create a golem not to help with domestic chores, but to fight the false accusation of ritual murder leveled against the Jews, the infamous blood libel. The 1,000-year-old European Christian canon that the Jews need the blood of a Christian child to bake matzah for Passover. By adding the theme of the golem as rescuer, Rosenberg fused the anti-Semitism that pervaded Europe during his own time with that of the golem, not unlike Superman, the comic strip hero who created in the late 1930s by two American Jews to protect the innocent and battle evil. The myth of the golem who defends Jews during times of persecution, which many people nowadays mistakenly trace back to the 16th century, is actually a modern literary invention, a brilliant stroke created single-handedly by Yudl Rosenberg. Henceforth, this innovation becomes a standard aspect in all teachings of the Maharal Golem legend. No wonder Yosef Dan, a folklore expert at the Hebrew University, called Rosenberg's Golem story Hebrew literature's most important contribution to world literature in the 20th century. Wow. Rosenberg's plot has all the ingredients to appeal to a wide range of readers: fantasy, romance, Kabbalah, and mysticism, adventure, suspense, detective story motifs, humor, false accusations, riveting courtroom trials, a duel of wills between leader of the Jewish and Christian communities, and a kindly and wise hero pitted against his hateful antagonist, and the mute and powerful golem whom the Maharal's magical amulet occasionally makes invisible. Besides bringing religio-cultural authenticity and the relevance to his book, Rosenberg also told a superb story and knew how to use comedic relief and bring legendary and historic personalities to life. Sounds like the dawn of the modern storytelling for sure. Because he was an expert in Kabbalah, he was able to include in his descriptions of the golem making all of the magical atmosphere inherent in the book of creation. It is not surprising, then, that Rosenberg's novel about the golem itself is a creature stemming from the Kabbalistic tradition. It's so full of Kabbalistic links, from the man who possesses the sparks of, to the ceremony of creating the golem, from the Hebrew alphabet possessing a special power to the idea of combining letters into words that form the divine name, from seeing Hebrew letters in colors to the golem's gift of distinguishing one hour from the next because of different scents that emanate from the lower Garden of Eden. Rosenberg's book is replete with the spirit of Kabbalah, which allows for such unreal and even surreal events in the story, like an amulet for invisibility, letters changing colors in the Siddur, questions asked, divinely answered in dreams, and other supernatural events that compete favorably with mid-20th century literature, magic, realism. Wow. Sounds like a wonderful book for a movie, for sure. In his depiction of characters, Rosenberg is always fair. Of course, the Maharal is wise and omnipotent, able to penetrate all mysteries, but the golem is no Superman. Once some Jewish toughs ambush him and cast him into a well where he is injured and nearly drowns. The priest Thaddeus is his novel Haman, a source of unmitigated evil. But King Rudolph is fair, even supportive. There is no whiff of state-sponsored anti-Semitism like in Tsarist Russia, nor is there widespread popular hatred of Jews like in Austria, Germany, and Poland before and during World War II. Anti-Semites exist. They surface during a blood-libel trial, but when they intend violence, the efficient police restrain them, and ultimately justice prevails. Balancing the evil priests is a decent cardinal after the even-handed theological debate between the Maharal and the priests. The cardinal praises the Maharal, and later, when Thaddeus initiates a blood libel, and the cardinal, knowing that this is a false accusation, must reluctantly submit a protocol to the court. He also quietly sends a copy to the Maharal to enable him to make adequate preparations to defend his community. In Rosenberg's book, the criminal justice system is also fair. Although Jews accused of blood libel are brought to court, the judges are open to evidence showing that the accusation is false, whereupon the evil conspirators who have committed perjury are punished. The police in Prague are more like a Western force. They are not a brutal arm of a repressive regime. Jews accused of ritual murder are indeed arrested, but freed when the falseness of the accusation is revealed. Likewise, when the police catch a Christian about to cast a dead Christian into a Jew's home before Passover, they arrest him and bring him into judgment. Rosenberg's character are not stereotypes of a Jewish tannery owner. This is just amazing to think that this is some of the anti-Semitism the Jewish people suffered this degree of treatment. Rosenberg's characters are not stereotypes. A Jewish tannery owner is not totally compassionate in his treatment of an injured young Christian worker. In revenge, his two older brothers are also employed in the tannery, plot a blood libel against their boss. But these two nasty brothers, who almost succeed in their fabricated accusation, are not wholly evil either. They care for their poor elderly mother. The Jewish people why is it jumping two at a time? Intend to and protect their younger brother. Rosenberg's Golem has an impressive number of innovations, all of which are used in subsequent retellings of the Golem legend in various art forms. The author is the first to name the Golem, humanize him. He can get hurt, recover, request permission for revenge against his attackers, assign the Golem tasks other than domestic chores, Give the golem the ability to read and write, have him follow complicated orders, let the golem initiate actions, have the golem fight for and protect the Jewish people against the blood libel and other injustices. Let the golem expire peacefully and not as a consequence of his unrestrained fury, and make the golem a thoroughly beneficent creature. Interesting. The chief ingredient for the success of the golem in the wondrous deeds of the Maharal of Prague, it can be argued, was given the difficult circumstances European Jews faced at the beginning of the 20th century. The book portrayal of the victory of the Jews and the triumph of good over evil. 10 years before the 1909 publication of Rosenberg's book, the European Jewish community had been shaken by an infamous blood libel case near Prague. Despite Rosenberg's story, there were no blood libels in Prague during the Maharal's tenure as chief rabbi in the late 16th century. The notorious pogroms in Kishinev, Russia in 1903 and 1905, the bloodiest outbreak of government-organized anti-Semitic violence in years, were the culmination of waves of anti-Jewish excesses in Russia at the end of the 19th century that forced hundreds of thousands of Jews to flee to the freedom and safety of America. A book like Rosenberg's, then, where the Jews overcome their tormentors, was just the escapist reading the Jews needed and wanted. What is most fascinating about this groundbreaking collection of stories is that in the decades after its publication, besides several translations, a spurt of artistic creation utilizes the Golem theme. Gustav Menrich's Kabbalistically inspired novel, The Golem, in 1915, in Germany, H. Livick's Yiddish verse drama The Golem in 1921, where the evil priest Thaddeus reappears attempting a blood libel similar in plot and setting to chapter 15 in Rosenberg's book. The classic silent expressionist German film Der Golem, directed by and starring Paul Wegner in 1921. The French film Le Golem, directed by Julien Duvivier, 1936. Many operas and ballets were written on this same theme in the succeeding decades to the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century, including a production by the Prague State Opera in 2001. George Louis Borges dealt with the problem theme in El Golem in 1958, a poem that inspired an elaborate Golem festival in Prague in October 2002 that included films, readings, songs, recitals, and chamber music concerts. Following are two examples of how Rosenberg's innovative twist to the role of the Golem influenced subsequent works. The passage below, which shows the Maharal in action without the Golem, is from a collection of Jewish tales and legends that are included in a book, Sipurim, by L. Wiesel, published in Prague in 1847. Wiesel states that he transcribed legends that had been passed down orally from generation to generation. In the story below, the Maharal, aided by his study of Kabbalistic texts, especially Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, is known to have magical powers. The emperor once had a strange whim. He wanted to see the patriarchs and the sons of Jacob and ordered Rabbi Lo to summon them from their graves. The rabbi consented, but made the condition that the emperor must not laugh no matter what he saw. The day and place were fixed, and the summoning began in the secluded room in the castle. The patriarchs and the founders of the tribes appeared one after the other in their true form, and the emperor was astounded at the size and power of these men of the days long gone by. For each of them showed himself with all his attributes, but when the fleet Naphtali skimmed over the ears of corn and stalks of flax, the emperor could not contain himself and began to laugh. At once the apparitions disappeared and the ceiling of the room began to descend. It would have crushed the emperor had not Rabbi Lo arrested it with the help of the Kabbalah. It is said that the falling ceilings can still be seen today in the room, which is kept closed, at least so the story goes, among the Jewish people. Hey, Zakia, welcome. In the silent film The Golem, Wagner used this scene with a slight but important variation as a crucial segment in his story. It is a perfect example of the influence that Rosenberg's book had on Wagner's retelling of the legend. In the film, the emperor has issued an edict of expulsion against the Jews. The Maharal requests an audience with the emperor, who grants it because of the rabbi's past service to the ruler. The Maharal brings the Golem with him. In a film within a film, the Maharal magically shows the emperor and his courts, the patriarchs, and the exodus from the Egypt. He has previously warned everyone not to laugh, but the courtiers do not heed him. As the laughter swells, the vault of the ceiling begins to crumble and descend. The frightened emperor tells the Maharal that if he saves him, he will rescind the expulsion edict. The Golem lifts his hands and supports the falling ceiling, saving everyone. True to the character that Rosenberg invented, here too, the Golem saves the Jewish people. In one of the stories of Niflos Maharal, a trial takes place in the synagogue, and the soul of the dead midwife who has exchanged two babies at birth has to testify. The Maharal gives his staff to his shamesh and tells him to bring back the woman's soul from the cemetery, whereupon she has to stand behind a partition. The congregants tremble with fear, but the Maharal calms them. Ansky's famous Yiddish play, The Dubuk from 1920, and its 1937 film version have a marvelous scene near the end where a trial takes place. One of the participants is a dead man. The rabbi gives his shemesh, his staff, and tells him to go to the cemetery to bring back the soul of the dead man to the synagogue where the trial is taking place. The dead man is to stand behind the partition. Meanwhile, the congregants tremble with fear. Given the similarity of so many points, Ansky doubtlessly read Rosenberg's popular book and adapted that scene for his Debuk movie. In contemporary Bella's letters, two Nobel laureates have contributed to the extension of the Maharal Golem legend. Isaac Bashevis, singer in The Golem in 1982, and Elie Wiesel in his version The Golem in 1983. Both these works were published as children's books, but not necessarily directed solely at youngsters. For the exciting and tension-filled narratives can also be read by adults. Hey, William Allen, as morality plays. And Michael Chabon used the Golem theme in his Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay from 2001. Some have even contended that robots, computers, and artificial intelligence are outgrowths of the Golem legend. A lot of those movies from the 40s and 50s. Perhaps it is no accident that Prague, so imbued with Golem stories, was the place where the Czech playwright Karel Čapek wrote his famous drama about robots, R.U.R. 1921, which introduces the word robot. Making something inanimate come to life, whether it is a Pygmalion statue in the ancient world, the attempts of the alchemist Paracelsus in the Middle Ages, the hero of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in 1818, or Carlo Collodi's Pinocchio from 1883, has always been an electrifying folk and literary motif. Given the abiding interests in the 20th century in this intriguing theme, and keeping in mind that since ancient times, both in the Jewish and non-Jewish world, man has had the incessant enchantment with creating a living creature. After all, imitatio Dei is a powerful impulse. Even in our day and age, you think about AI, artificial intelligence. Yeah. It's amazing that Yudl Rosenberg's influential work had never been translated from his original Hebrew into English, a literary lacuna that has now been filled. And this is by Professor Kurt Levant, who wrote that for us. Notice, it is common knowledge that every person can forbid the use of his possessions to anyone else. Hence, I declare Herewith that I strictly forbid and prohibit one and all from deriving any benefit whatsoever from the publication of my book without my permission, neither the complete text nor part of it, neither in this land or in any other land. Moreover, it is well known that any violator will also be surely punished according to the law of this empire. Who will comply? All who comply will prosper. From Rabbi Yudl Rosenberg himself. All right, publisher's preface. Dear readers, I am herewith presenting you with a delightful and precious treasure that until now had lain hidden from some 300 years in the great library of Metz. That the Maharal had miraculously created a living golem from loam and clay and was an oral tradition well known to everyone. However, over a period of time, people began expressing doubts to the point where enlightened men were already denying this entire incident and dismissing it as nothing but a folk legend. But the fact is that when the great Gaon, our saintly master, Rabbi Yeskiel Landau of blessed memory, the author of Known in Judah, was the Rabbi of Prague, he established the truth of this story, that in the attic of the great synagogue lay the golem whom the Maharal had created. It is widely known that one day Rabbi Landau fasted and went to the ritual bath. After commanding 10 of his students to recite psalms on his behalf, he wrapped himself in his talit and tefillin and ascended alone to the attic. The Gaon spent a long while up there. When he descended, his face was marked by terror and dread. He proclaimed that henceforth he was making even more stringent the Maharal's prohibition that no one ever dare go up to the attic. However, after several decades, many people once again began to doubt the truth of the story because this incident was not recorded in any book of Jewish history, but eventually the truth surfaces. And now all Jews will know and realize that this entire matter was written down by the Maharal's son-in-law, the great Gaon, our saintly master, Rabbi Yitzhak Katz, of blessed memory, as can be seen by some stories herein in the Maharal's remarks printed at the end of the book. But all this has long been stored in the great library of Metz, along with many other of the Maharal's books and manuscript. And I thank God for helping me to acquire this copy from my kinsman, Rabbi Chaim Scharfstein of Metz. And I have spent a lot of money on this, and besides the cost, I have worked hard to prepare this book for publication. And so I hope that every seeker of knowledge will be grateful to me for this labor. Whoever sees this book will surely not be able to put it down and will find a place for it in his library. The publisher, the insignificant Yudl Rosenberg of Warsaw. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this. Bill of sale. I herewith inform the general public that it is forbidden to reprint this book without my permission, for I purchased it at full value and I own it in perpetuity. Therefore, I am displaying the bill of sale for this book for everyone to see. Praise be God. My signature below is testimony as efficacious as 100 valid witnesses that I, the undersigned Chaim Scharfstein of the Holy Community of Metz, have sold to my kinsman, the illustrious rabbi and scholar, our master Rabbi Yehuda Yudl Rosenberg, rabbinic judge and spiritual leader of the Holy Community of Warsaw, the book that was copied from the holy manuscript of the renowned Gaon and master, the saintly Rabbi Yitzhak Katz of blessed memory, son-in-law of the saintly Maharal of blessed memory, who indicted in his holy manuscript some of the great wondrous deeds, marvels, and miracles that his father-in-law accomplished in the city of Prague, when he created the Golem and used him to save the Jews from various misfortunes, especially the calamity of the blood libel. This book was located here in the great library of the Holy Community of Metz. I sold a copy of this book at full value to my kinsman, the aforementioned illustrious rabbi of the city of Warsaw, to be his possession and his alone in perpetuity. From this moment, I am placing an absolute injunction upon myself never again to sell to anyone else another copy of the above manuscript. At the same time, I announce to the public that I am in possession of another long manuscript by the Holy Maharal about the supreme sanctity of the Sabbath, entitled The Greatness of Israel, which comprises more than 100 octavo pages. I will sell this manuscript to the first person who offers 800 crowns. Any interested buyer is directed to my kinsman, the above-mentioned Gaon and rabbi from the city of Warsaw. This is signed here the 1st of Adar, 5669 or 1909, here in the holy city of Metzheim, Scharfstein. So you see the way the author is writing in the believability. Chapter 3, the history of the great Gaon, the holy supernatural supernal Maharal of Prague. May the memory of that righteous saintly man be blessed for life in the world to come. The holy Maharal was born in Worms in the year 5273 or 1513 during the first Seder of Passover. His saintly father, Bezalel of blessed memory, was an extremely righteous man. With his very birth, the Maharal brought salvation and deliverance to the world. The Jews were then suffering from unrelenting persecution by the Christian nations, who claimed that the Jews needed Christian blood for their Passover matzahs. Hardly a Passover festival occurred in the lands of Bohemia, Moravia, Hungary, and Spain without a dead Christian boy being thrown into a hidden corner of a rich Jew's property in order to accuse him of murdering the child and using his blood for ritual purposes. Can you imagine such deeds? In Worms, too, that Passover people secretly plotted a blood libel against the Maharal's father, the above-mentioned Rabbi Bezalel. Here is what happened. A Christian carrying a dead child in a sack stole into a Jewish quarter intent upon casting the corpse through a small window into the cellar of Rabbi Bezalel's house. Rabbi Bezalel's wife was pregnant then in her 7th month, but during the Seder of the first night of Passover, she suddenly felt birth pangs. A big tumult ensued in the house, and amid the cries and shouts, some men ran outside to summon a midwife. At that moment, the Christian carrying the dead child in a sack was not far from the house. Seeing men running toward him in a panic and loudly shouting, the Christian thought they had discovered his plot and were hastening to seize him. So he turned and fled to the Christian neighborhood. He was so frightened and confused, he kept running at breakneck speed even after he had reached the Christian part of town because he thought the Jews were still after him to seize him. But the police and night watchmen, noticing a man running helter-skelter and carrying something in a sack on his shoulders, and seeing far off the men from Rabbi Bezalel's house also rushing in the same direction, assumed he was a thief fleeing with stolen goods and that the others were in pursuit to retrieve the theft. The policemen caught and searched him. When they saw what he had, they brought him to the chief of police, where he was vigorously interrogated. Only then did the man confess that he had brought the dead boy there in order to accuse Rabbi Bezalel of the blood libel. The police arrested and brought the man to judgment. News of this salvation immediately spread through the entire city. Rabbi Bezalel prophesied regarding the newborn boy, saying, "This one will comfort us and save us from the blood libel." He named the boy Yehuda Lib after the verse, Yehuda is a lion's whelp, on "Pray, my son, have you grown?" All right, chapter 4, the Maharal's battle against the blood libel. In the year 1572, the Maharal was invited from Posen, where he had been the rabbi, to become chief rabbi and head of the rabbinical court of the Holy Community of Prague. He had already achieved world fame on account of his great wisdom in all branches of knowledge and in all the languages, and because of this, he was beloved and admired by the learned Gentiles. The biblical verse, "A man who excels at his work shall attend upon kings," described him, for he was also esteemed and respected by King Rudolph. Therefore, it was within his power to battle against the enemies of Israel who mocked and insulted us because of the blood libel until he attained the upper hand and triumphed over them. King Rudolph promised the Maharal he would not permit any court in his land to level the accusation of ritual murder against the Jews. When the Maharal was appointed rabbi of the Holy Community of Prague, it was a calamitous time for the Jews, and they suffered greatly from the blood libel. on account of that despicable accusation. The blood of many Jewish souls, innocent of any blame, was gratuitously spilled like water. Thereupon the Maharal gave an order to spread the word openly to all the nations that he was prepared to stand straight like a wall to battle against the blood libel with all its might and to exculpate his fellow Jews from this despicable false accusation. The Maharal's suggestion to have a disputation with the priests. After this, the Maharal wrote a letter to the Cardinal of Prague, Jan Sylvester, requesting an invitation for a debate concerning the blood libel. He declared he was prepared to offer incontrovertible proof that was fundamentally untrue, that it was just a despicable false accusation. The cardinal responded that he agreed and was prepared to participate. A few days later, the cardinal summoned 300 learned priests to the disputation. When the Maharal learned of this, he sent a message to the cardinal. Debating face to face with 300 priests, he wrote, was beyond his strength. Rather, he suggested that the disputation should stretch over a 30-day period. Each day, 10 priests would submit their questions and claims to the cardinal in writing, and each day the Maharal would come to the cardinal with his written answers. The cardinal was amenable to this. When the disputation began, during the entire 30 days, all the Jews in Prague recited the complete book of Psalms daily at dawn in all the synagogues and houses of study, and fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. The disputation. Many questions and claims were raised during this disputation pertaining to Judaism and Christianity, and it was all recorded from beginning to end in a voluminous book of history. Above all, the disputation reached a pitch of excitement regarding the following 5 questions. Is it true that Jews are required to use the blood of Christians for their Passover holiday? Should Jews be blamed for the murder of Jesus of Nazareth? Since Jews consider Christianity as an idol worship, are they obliged, according to the tenets of Judaism, to hate Christians? Why do Jews hate and display great hostility to an apostate and always lie in wait to kill him? 5. Why do Jews exult over all the other nations on account of their great Torah? Can't the other nations exult even more because they are good by nature and by birth, and hence they didn't have to be burdened with the heavy yoke of such great Torah, for they have no need for it? These are questions I think, we see a lot of in the debates today, or even in a lot of the Tanakh Talk episodes. William Hall is really trying to keep the focus against Christianity. And you see Rabbi Singer and his counter-missionary movement answering some of these questions. For the first question, the Maharal presented incontrovertible evidence from the Bible and the Talmud that the Jews consider blood extremely abominable and impure. Blood is prohibited and abhorred even more than fat, and so all the more the blood of a human being, which defiles even by proximity. Purity and cleanliness are deeply rooted in and fundamental to the Jewish religion. So how can a Jew even possibly consider using human blood for ritual purposes and for fulfilling a religious precept? For the second question, the Maharal replied that first of all, only the Sadducee sect, which worked hand in hand with King Herod and the wicked Roman authorities who ruled in Jerusalem, took part in the death sentence of Jesus. The Roman hatred of Jesus of Nazareth was very, very great, for the Roman rulers considered Jesus a rebel against their government, one who sought to free the Jews of the Roman yoke by means of a revolt and war, and then be crowned as their king. However, the real Jews, namely the Pharisees and the Essenes, did not recognize Herod's kingship and had no desire to take part in this trial. Second, the Maharal replied that anyone who seeks revenge against the Jews because of the unjust death sentence against Jesus of Nazareth is truly a heretic, an unbeliever who has no faith in divine guidance, divine providence, and God's dominion in this world. This may be better understood by means of a parable. A mighty king had an only son who had many enemies in the capital city. These enemies once falsely accused this son of insulting and defaming the honor of his father, the king. The son was then imprisoned. Because of his conduct, the judges sentenced him to die by hanging. His father, the king, clearly knew that this was a lie, just a false accusation by his enemies. Nevertheless, the king remained silent and voiced no protest. Later, the judge's deputies came to carry out the sentence and put the king's son, who had also been subjected to hideous torments, to death in the presence of the king. The only son pleaded with his father, the king, and said, "Save me, father, rescue me from the hands of these murderers. For you know the truth. I never insulted or defamed you." His father, the king, remained silent. He did not even say a word, but watched the deputies murdering his son without cause. Moreover, the king did not contradict the deputies' remarks that they were doing this at his behest. Now let us examine this matter. So he's seeing this parable that he's laying out. This is huge for those that are in the counter missionary movement, for sure. Now let us examine this matter. Who is more culpable in the death of the son? The judges who erroneously sentenced him to death for the sake of the king's honor, or the king who knew the truth and didn't even lift a finger to signal, "Let him go," whereupon the son would have been forced or freed at once. Without a doubt, one can conclude that the king himself was responsible for his only son's death. Now let us return to our subject. The moral of this parable is obvious to everyone. Christianity declares that Jesus of Nazareth was the beloved only Son of God. So then, if the judges, believing that the son rebelled against his father and disparaged his honor and his teachings, rendered an erroneous judgment, where was the father's compassion? The Bible states, "As the father has compassion on his sons, when the son pleaded with his father, why didn't he save him from that cruel death?" The son was killed gratuitously solely for his father's honor and for violating his commands and his teachings. Now, if we assume that his father was powerless to save him, or that all this was done without his father's knowledge, we demean thereby his father's honor, for it is improper, indeed absolute heresy, to think thus of Hashem. Yet Christian doctrine holds that Jesus was obliged to suffer this punishment and experience this cruel death by the will and resolve of God his Father, even though he taking revenge against them and repaying evil for good. And even if the judges who sentenced Jesus to death did not have that beneficence in mind, but only harm, they still can in no way be held culpable. For the judgment was handed down from heaven, and their sense went askew when they mistakenly sentenced Jesus to death. If Joseph, being the righteous, said to his brothers, "Although you intended me harm, God intended it for good, for the survival of the many people," then surely the Christian people should not seek revenge against the people of Israel on account of this. Joseph's brothers truly wanted to harm him and premeditated their deed because they hated him. But the Jews who sentenced Jesus to death had no selfish motives, but acted only for the honor of Hashem. And if, according to Christian doctrine, the trial was tainted and erroneous, why did they believe that it was God ordained to assure the survival of many people? All the adherents of Christianity. Hence, they have no basis for saying of the Jews, "You intend to harm me." Do you see his logic? So crystal clear. Then the cardinal asked of Maharal, "If so, then why was Pharaoh punished with severe plagues when the Israelites left Egypt? For it is written in your Torah, 'Israel is my firstborn son,' and if the father saw his son Israel suffering and did not protest, he obviously wished this to happen, and so he ordained it in the covenant of the pieces. So why was Pharaoh punished?" The Maharal responded to the cardinal, "But there is a great difference between one incident and the other. For Pharaoh declared, 'I do not know the Lord,' and did not believe at all that Israel was enslaved to him only because of God's decree. Hence, he did not realize that by keeping the Israelites enslaved, he was fulfilling God's decree. But his tormenting them was solely for his own benefit. This is one point Rabbi Goldberg's brought out in our class, the Genesis class. He did not only to the Israelites, but to all the slaves in Egypt, whom the Egyptians oppressed in perpetuity. In other words, that's where their culpability lied, declaring there is no God capable of saving them from their hands, and that is why Pharaoh deserved punishment and why God showed him his mighty hand to inform him that he was the creator and the master and overseer of the world. However, the judges who imposed the death sentence on Jesus did so only to fulfill the precepts of God's Torah, for they thought of him as one who was going to abrogate God's Torah, and they involved themselves in this trial according to the laws of the Torah solely for the sake of God's honor and not for any benefit to themselves. Therefore, one can readily see that if it really was a tainted trial, the merciful divine Father should have had compassion for his only Son and informed the judges from heaven not to kill Jesus for insulting God's honor. For the truth is, Jesus did not insult God's honor at all, but since you believe that this was truly the will of God and that his Son Jesus also wanted this, you can in no way blame the people at whose hands this was done, for they were only emissaries in this matter. So do you see at the base of the logic, they have no case on that point. Maharal also answered the last three questions by means of a parable. He said, let us examine the actions of an earthly king and the manner in which he deals with his armies. Every king has royal advisors, ministers, great and respected. He also has various branches of armed forces. They have officers over thousands, over 500, over 100. A simple soldier has to submit to and salute his officer who leads a 100-man unit. Similarly, that officer to a leader of 500 and the latter to a commander of thousands and so on. But all this is done when the king is not present. But when the king himself stands in all his honor and glory and inspects his troops, all of them are obligated from the lowest to the highest rank to submit to and salute no one but the king himself. And then if one of them has a request, he must turn only to the king. And if a plain soldier makes his request to the leader of a 100-man unit in the presence of the king, or if the salute he is obligated to give the king is offered to his unit leader in the presence of the king, that soldier has insulted the king's honor and will be brought to judgment for punishment. This may be compared to the armies of the world vis-a-vis the king of heaven. According to Judaism, pagans are only those who do not direct their pleas and prayers to the one creator, but worship the hosts of heaven, the stars, and the constellations. The Talmud absolutely despises those pagans and considers them licentious creatures, not men, but people who address their pleas and all other kings, their pleas and prayers to the one and only creator. The master of the universe are not considered pagans by the Talmud. Similarly, according to the Talmud, a Jew who converts to paganism forgoes his humanity and is considered licentious. But one who converts to a monotheistic religion does not forgo his humanity and is not considered licentious. He will merely be brought to judgment. Of his kind, it is said, even though he sinned, he is still a Jew. It is understandable then that the hatred the Jews bear against apostates to Christianity is not the hatred mentioned in the Talmud, where that apostate is considered licentious and the subject to that persecution, a hatred natural towards someone who has betrayed his people and his roots. Take, for example, an earthly king who, like him, like all other kings, has several kinds of armed services, infantry, cavalry, charioteers, sailors, and the royal guards, who are the most elite. Some kings also have an armed unit whose soldiers are dedicated to it from birth and have a special attachment to it. If a plain foot soldier flees of his own accord from his unit to another branch of service, even though it is part of the royal forces, he will still be treated as a traitor and a deserter from the king's service and will surely be punished. How much more so if a soldier from that unit that serves the king from birth spurns his special unit and flees to another branch of service. That soldier will shame and disgrace himself even more. In addition to punishment, he will be held a traitor by his family and his people, and everyone will scorn and despise him. This may be compared to Jews who convert to Christianity. Although they are not considered pagans, they still can be despised and disdained by the Jews for betraying their people and kindred. Such hatred is natural, even though it is not a religious hatred. As for the Jews feeling superior to all other peoples because of their Torah and declaring, "You have chosen us from among all other nations," there is no justification for other nations to be envious and hate Jews in their hearts for this and challenge them and complain about it. This too will readily be understood by means of a parable about an earthly king. In his capital city, the king had 2,000 soldiers from two different branches of the military, 1,000 from each. The king placed a heavy burden on one of these units and imposed much work on them, both physical and mental. He spurns them and adjured them with many oaths to devote themselves to their labors all day long. Upon the other 1,000-man unit, the king placed only a minimal burden and easy work. One day, a quarrel broke out between the two units. The ones who labored and hard boasted and exulted over the other unit and declared they were more privileged, only they should be considered the royal guard. This shows that the king chose them over the other soldiers to give them the yoke of the work and education only because he understood that the other soldiers were not capable or trained for such work. What an analogy. Now, the ones who had the light load gloated over the other group and said just the opposite. We alone are more important and privileged in the eyes of the king, and only we are worthy of being called the king's guard. And the proof is that because the king loves us and didn't want to burden us with excessive labor, for he understood that we were upright men by nature and followed the correct path, even if we were free all day long. But the heavy yoke of work and education was placed upon the other 1,000-man unit because the king knew them to be unruly men who would learn to become upright only through work and education. Now, this argument reached the ears of the minister of war, who was in charge of all the armed forces. He sent his deputy to tell them not to quarrel, harbor, envy, or hate one another, for such disputes were for simpletons and fools. On the contrary, both 1,000-man units could boast and be proud of their assignment and declare that the king chose them above the other and loved them more. And so it should be, for by means of this, each group will love its work and will faithfully fulfill its tasks. We can no longer decide which of the two groups is right, but someday it will become clear of its own accord by means of the two conclusive signs. One that is that in the future we shall see to which of the two groups the king will give a greater reward for its work. And two, when the king will reveal himself during a trip to his country, we will see which armed unit will be chosen to share honors with him. May we see that in our day. And then we will know that only it can be called the royal guard. The moral of this parable is easily understood, that the entire matter revolves around the relationship between the Jews and other nations. And only in the future will all the people of the world recognize and know who is more privileged. But for the present, all this envy and hatred is but folly and stupidity. The 30 days of disputation passed. A different and interesting debate took place each day. The cardinal found the Maharal's responses on all 30 questions very satisfactory, and he paid him great honor. Nevertheless, one priest, Thaddeus by name, who was known for his anti-Semitism, stood up virulently against the Maharal. The priest maintained that in any case, many Jews, benighted in their thinking, believed it was a great religious precept to use the blood of a Christian for Passover, saying that this was a tradition handed down from their forefather, and that even if their rabbi would decree otherwise, they wouldn't believe or obey him. So how could the Maharal take responsibility for these benighted Jews whose education was very rudimentary. Naturally, the Maharal could not rebut these remarks decisively. The entire disputation was later recorded in a book that was sent to King Rudolph. The Maharal's comments, delivered with intelligence and understanding, pleased the king, who sent his deputy to the Maharal to prepare the rabbi for an audience with him. You know what? And I think, I'm going to stop it there for today. And hopefully you folks are enjoying this. And we'll come back and catch more of this wonderful debate and see how the story leads into the formation of the Golem of their legends. So I think we've got the reality of this book, but also can sense its high degree of literary writing, and hopefully you folks are enjoying it. So it's a different topic for sure, but we've been doing such hard studies of late the last several months. We've been reading deep books and highlighting deep points and talking about integrating, so many characteristics and character traits into our lives. I thought it might be a fresh change of pace to discuss something more that's literary fiction, and draw from it what we will. But may Hashem be blessed. I'm thankful for everybody that has joined with us today, and we will be back. We'll be back with Rocky Mountain readings, Hashem willing, Tuesday. I've got a night shift. Help. Hashem, great, alive, light. Regular readings because it helps inspire me to keep going forward, and I'm always open to suggestions and questions and comments. So if you have any, feel free to leave them in the chat box or drop me a line on Dan Barwell at Facebook, or you can always email me if you want at dan.ca@britolam.community is my email with the Noahide World Center. But my animating filmmaking mind is kind of provoked with this. I mean, I think we could do a nice CG Golem movie, but it's been done before, old ones, but I don't know if it's time for a modern one. Just a notion, but this story's got me interestingly piqued, and I look forward to seeing how it continues. But it's written real well now that we're into the writing itself. So please come back and join me on Tuesday. I won't be making it Monday, but I do have scheduled this week. I am scheduled for the double feature on Saturday with Rabbi Kaufman doing Pirkei Avos, and we've got our final episode of Beyond the Seven, the 48 Ways to Wisdom, with Rabbi Aaron David posted this weekend after that, which should be beautiful. And also have on Sunday, actually, we don't have a Sunday class with Genesis with Rabbi Goldberg because his son is getting married, but he is going to broadcast in the Zoom room if you want to see a Jewish wedding. So I might stream that. We'll see, Hashem willing, how I feel after a night shift. But keep me in your prayers for strength to keep bringing you some broadcasts. It's always a joy to see each and every one of you grow. And just know I'm open to reading things that are of interest to you. I just thought it would be a fresh change to get into something more story-based rather than heavy theology that we've been reading of late. So please come back Monday or Tuesday, excuse me, for more Rocky Mountain readings. We're going to continue with more of this wonderful book, The Golem and the Wondrous Deeds of the Maharal of Prague. And yeah, Shabbat Shalom to each and every one of you. You can't hear me. My microphone looks hot on my audio mixer, so yeah, maybe if I'm talking a little bit low, but I mean, it looks like my audio mixer's hot, right? So yeah, I'll review that, but yeah, I'm showing it at full tilt. Anyways, I'll have to keep an eye on that. So yeah, Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and we hope to see you with more for the Golem early next week. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Bye for now.